Zaxnor felt a bead of cold sweat trickle down his carapace as he stared at the obstacle course before him. The Galactic Federation's Interspecies Combat Academy was renowned for its rigorous training, but this was something else entirely. "You can't be serious," he chittered nervously to his human instructor, Sarah. "This is what you consider easy training?" Sarah grinned, her teeth gleaming in the harsh light of Outpost Sigma-9's training grounds. "Trust me, big guy, this is nothing compared to what we put our rookies through back on Earth." Zaxnor's antenna twitched in disbelief as he surveyed the nightmarish landscape before him. A series of towering walls, razor-wire-topped fences, and treacherous pits stretched as far as his compound eyes could see. In the distance, he could make out the faint outlines of robotic sentries, their weapons glinting ominously. But the gravity here is 3 times that of my homeworld," Zaxnor protested, his exoskeleton creaking as he shifted his weight. "And the atmosphere, it's so thick. How am I supposed to—" Sarah cut him off with a friendly slap on the back that nearly sent the alien sprawling. "That's the point, Zax. We train in the worst conditions imaginable so that when the real thing comes along it feels like a cakewalk." Zaxnor's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation in his species. "Cake walk?" he repeated, confusion evident in his multi-toned voice. "I do not understand this human idiom, but I assure you, Instructor Sarah, there is nothing easy about what lies before us." Sarah's expression softened slightly. She'd been working with alien recruits for years now, but sometimes she forgot just how different their perspectives could be. "Look, Zaxnor, I know it seems impossible now, but that's the beauty of it. Humans have a saying, the only easy day was yesterday. Every time you push through something you thought was beyond your limits, you grow stronger." Zaxnor's compound eyes swiveled to take in his classmates. There were a dozen other alien species represented in this training cohort, each struggling with their own unique physiological challenges. A gelatinous blobulon was already oozing its way up the first wall, leaving a glistening trail in its wake. A avian Crexixi fluttered nervously at the base of a climbing rope, its wings clipped to prevent any unfair advantages. "But why?" Zaxnor finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why push ourselves to such extremes?" Sarah's eyes grew distant for a moment, and Zaxnor detected a change in her body language, a tension he'd come to associate with humans recalling unpleasant memories. "Because out there," she said, gesturing to the star-filled sky above the training dome, "the universe doesn't care about fair fights or comfortable conditions. The enemies we face, the Swarm, the Void Collective, even the rogue AI fleets, they won't hesitate to exploit any weakness. We train like this so that when the real battle comes, we're ready for anything." Zaxnor felt a strange sensation in his thorax, a mix of fear and something else. Admiration, perhaps? He'd heard stories of human tenacity, of course. Their species was famous, or infamous depending on who you asked, throughout the galaxy for their ability to endure and adapt. But seeing it up close, being asked to emulate it, it was simultaneously terrifying and awe-inspiring. I will try," Zaxnor said, straightening his posture as much as his exoskeleton would allow. "For the honor of my hive and the safety of the galaxy." Sarah beamed at him. "That's the spirit. Now let's start with something simple. See that mud pit over there?" Zaxnor's gaze followed her pointing finger to a vast expanse of thick, bubbling sludge. His antennae drooped. "You want me to swim in that?" "Swim? Nah, that's too easy. You're going to crawl through it, on your back, while carrying this." Sarah reached into a nearby crate and pulled out what appeared to be a solid metal bar, easily twice Zaxnor's body weight. The alien's mandibles gaped in shock. "Impossible. The buoyancy alone would—" "That's the point," Sarah interrupted with a wink. "You're going to have to figure out how to counteract it. Use that big brain of yours. Maybe those extra limbs will come in handy, eh?" As Zaxnor stared at the seemingly insurmountable challenge before him, a strange thing happened. Deep within his thorax, in a place he didn't even know existed, a tiny spark ignited. It was small at first, barely noticeable amidst the swirling storm of doubt and fear. But as he watched his classmates begin to tackle their own trials, the blobulon stretching itself to impossible thinness to squeeze through a narrow gap, the Crexxi using its beak to climb where its clipped wings couldn't carry it, the spark grew. "Very well, Instructor Sarah," Zaxnor said, his voice steadier than he felt. I am ready to begin. Sarah's grin widened. That's what I like to hear, but remember, this is just the warm-up. Wait until you see what we've got planned for the afternoon session. As Zaxner took his first tentative steps towards the mud pit, he couldn't help but wonder what he'd gotten himself into. But mixed with that apprehension was a growing sense of excitement. For the first time since joining the Galactic Federation's forces, he felt like he was truly being pushed to his limits and beyond. Little did Zaxner know, this was just the beginning of a transformation that would reshape not only his own capabilities, but the very nature of interspecies combat tactics throughout the galaxy. 3 solar cycles later, Zaxner stood at attention alongside his classmates. Their once pristine exoskeletons, scales, and fur were caked with mud, scored with laser burns, and in some cases, sporting new cybernetic enhancements to replace limbs lost in training accidents. But despite their battered appearance, there was a fire in their eyes, or equivalent sensory organs, that hadn't been there before. Sarah paced before them, her own uniform showing signs of wear and tear. She'd been right there with them through every grueling exercise, every seemingly impossible challenge. It was one of the things that had earned her the unwavering respect of her alien charges. "All right, you magnificent misfits," Sarah began, her voice carrying across the training ground. "When you arrived here, most of you couldn't make it through a standard human obstacle course without collapsing. Now?" She paused, a fierce pride evident in her expression. "Now, you're ready to take on anything the universe can throw at you." Zaxner felt his carapace swell with a strange mixture of exhaustion and elation. The past 3 cycles had been the most challenging of his life, pushing him to physical and mental limits he never knew he possessed. He'd seen things that defied explanation, humans willingly subjecting themselves to exercises that seemed more like torture than training, always pushing for one more rep, one more mile, one more impossible feat. "But your training isn't over," Sarah continued, her tone growing serious. "In fact, it's only just beginning. What you've learned here are the basics, the foundation upon which we'll build the most formidable fighting force the galaxy has ever seen." A ripple of excitement passed through the assembled aliens. Even the stoic lithoids, creatures of living stone, seemed to vibrate with anticipation. "Tomorrow, you'll be assigned to your permanent squads," Sarah explained. "You'll train together, eat together, and eventually, fight together. The bonds you form here will be stronger than any alloy, more unbreakable than a neutron star. Because out there," she pointed to the sky once more, "out there your squad is all you've got." Zaxner's gaze drifted to his fellow trainees. He'd come to know each of them intimately over the past 3 cycles. He knew which of Graxelor's 3 hearts beat fastest during sprints, how to calm Zixie's when her photosynthetic processes went into overdrive from stress, and the precise frequency needed to shatter the crystalline armor of Karthos, a trick that had saved both their lives during a particularly harrowing live-fire exercise. "But before we move on to the next phase of your training," Sarah said, a mischievous glint in her eye, "I think it's time we showed you what real easy training looks like for humans." A collective groan rose from the assembled aliens, but it was tinged with an undercurrent of excitement. They'd all heard rumors of the legendary human training regimens, whispered about in mess halls and barracks across the galaxy. "Instructor," Zaxner found himself speaking up, surprising even himself. "We are ready for any challenge you deem fit to give us." Sarah's eyebrows shot up in amusement. "Is that so, Zaxner? Well then, I hope you're all ready for a little thing we like to call Hell Week. But don't worry, we'll start you off easy. Just a casual 50-mile run through simulated Death World terrain. Oh, and did I mention you'll be carrying twice your body weight in gear?" As his classmates buzzed and chittered with a mixture of dread and determination, Zaxner felt that familiar spark in his thorax ignite once more. But this time, it wasn't just a tiny flame. It was a roaring inferno, fueled by the knowledge that all of them, were capable of so much more than they'd ever imagined. "Bring it on," Zaxner said, mandibles clicking in what Sarah had come to recognize as his version of a smile. "We won't let you down." Sarah nodded, her expression a mix of pride and something else, a fierce, almost predatory anticipation. "I know you won't, because if there's one thing I've learned about you aliens, it's that you're just as crazy as we are." You just needed someone to show you how to tap into it. As the class began to prepare for their next impossible task, Zaxner couldn't help but reflect on how far they'd come. When he'd first arrived at the Interspecies Combat Academy, he'd been convinced that humans were insane, pushing themselves and others to ridiculous extremes for no apparent reason. Now he understood. It wasn't about the specific exercises or the punishing conditions. It was about forging something greater than the sum of its parts. It was about taking a diverse group of beings from across the galaxy and transforming them into a cohesive unit capable of facing any threat. And as he looked at his fellow trainees, beings he now considered closer than family, Zaxner realized that the humans had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. They hadn't just created soldiers. They'd created a force that could reshape the very fabric of galactic society. The universe had no idea what was coming. 6 standard galactic months later, alarms blared throughout the Galactic Federation's primary defense station orbiting the contested world of Nexus Prime. The Swarm, a hive-mind collective of insectoid beings bent on consuming all organic matter in the galaxy, had launched a surprise offensive against the planet's meager defenses. In the station's command center, Admiral Korthal, a veteran of a dozen interstellar conflicts, stared at the tactical holodisplay with a mixture of dread and resignation. The Swarm fleet outnumbered their own forces 10-1, and reinforcements were days away at best. "It's over," Korthal muttered, his tentacles drooping in defeat. "We can't hold against a force of that size. We need to order an immediate evacuation of the planet." But before the order could be given, a priority communication flashed across the main screen. Admiral Korthal's eyes widened as he read the message, then reread it, unable to believe what he was seeing. "Impossible," he whispered. His second-in-command, a Volcran named Ixiel, peered at the screen. "Sir? What is it?" Korthal swallowed hard, his throat sacs pulsating rapidly. It's the 1st Interspecies Rapid Response Battalion. They're requesting permission to engage the Swarm fleet." Ixiel's bioluminescent patches flared in shock. But that's suicide. They're a single battalion against an entire invasion force." "I know," Korthal said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But look at their commanding officer." Ixiel's gaze shifted to the bottom of the message where a name and rank were displayed. Commander Sarah Chen, Earth Special Forces, Redibo. "A human?" Ixiel gasped. "Leading an interspecies battalion? But that's unprecedented," Korthal finished. "And possibly our only hope." He took a deep breath, then opened a channel to respond to the incoming force. "1st Interspecies Rapid Response Battalion, this is Admiral Korthal. The situation here is beyond critical. Are you sure you want to engage?" The response came almost immediately in a voice that sent chills down Korthal's spine, and not just because of the multi-tonal harmonics produced by the diverse vocal structures of the battalion's members. "Admiral, this is Commander Chen. My team has been training for this exact scenario for months. We're not just sure, we're eager. Just sit back and enjoy the show. You're about to see what happens when you combine the best traits of a dozen species with human ingenuity and a whole lot of crazy." Before Korthal could respond, a new set of signatures appeared on the tactical display. But these weren't the massive capital ships or swarms of fighters he was used to seeing. Instead, there were hundreds, no thousands, of small, agile craft, each emitting an energy signature unlike anything he'd ever encountered. "What in the name of the cosmic egg?" Ixiel breathed, his bioluminescence pulsing rapidly in confusion and awe. As they watched, the swarm of small craft engaged the swarm's massive fleet. What followed defied all conventional tactics and strategies. The interspecies forces moved with a coordination and precision that seemed impossible, given the diverse physiologies involved. Korthal gaped as he saw a lithoid pilot, encased in a specially designed craft, deliberately ram into a swarm carrier, its crystalline structure absorbing the impact and sending shards of itself tearing through the enemy ship's hull. In its wake, a gelatinous blobulon oozed through the breaches, its amorphous form carrying a payload of high-yield explosives deep into the swarm vessel's core. Nearby, a squadron of ships piloted by the avian Krexixi executed maneuvers that should have torn apart both ships and pilots, their natural affinity for three-dimensional movement pushed to physics-defying extremes. They darted between the massive tentacles of swarm bioships, planting targeting beacons for the heavy artillery stationed back on Nexus Prime. And there, at the heart of the chaos, was a ship that could only belong to Commander Chen herself. It danced through the battlefield like a thing possessed, always one step ahead of the swarm's attacks, coordinating the efforts of the entire battalion with a precision that bordered on precognition. "This is impossible," Korthal muttered, unable to tear his eyes away from the unfolding spectacle. But as the battle raged on, the impossible became undeniable. The 1st Interspecies Rapid Response Battalion, against all odds, was winning. The swarm's numerical advantage meant nothing in the face of tactics they couldn't predict and abilities they'd never encountered. Hours later, as the last swarm ship retreated into hyperspace, leaving behind a debris field that would take years to clear, Admiral Korthal found himself at a loss for words. The bridge of his command station erupted in cheers and celebrations, but he remained frozen, staring at the tactical display in disbelief. A priority communication alert snapped him out of his daze. With trembling tentacles, he opened the channel. Content from the previous part of the story. Commander Chen's face appeared on the screen, streaked with sweat and what appeared to be some kind of iridescent alien blood. But her eyes were bright, alive with the fire of victory. "Admiral," she said, her voice hoarse but triumphant, "Nexus Prime is secure. The swarm has been repelled, requesting permission to begin cleanup operations and establish a perimeter in case of counterattack." Korthal struggled to find his voice. When he finally spoke, it was barely above a whisper. "Granted, Commander, and thank you. You and your battalion have accomplished the impossible today." Sarah's lips quirked in a weary smile. "With all due respect, sir, nothing's impossible. That's the first lesson we teach in interspecies combat training. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a team to debrief and about a dozen different species' medical needs to attend to." As the communication channel closed, Admiral Korthal turned to his still-stunned second-in-command. "Ixil," he said, his voice regaining some of its usual authority. "I want everything we have on this interspecies combat training program, and get me a direct line to Galactic High Command. I think it's time we reconsidered our entire approach to galactic defense." In the aftermath of the Battle of Nexus Prime, as it came to be known, the legend of the 1st Interspecies Rapid Response Battalion spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Worlds that had long resisted joining the Galactic Federation now clamored for membership, eager for the protection offered by these new elite forces. The swarm, for the first time in centuries, retreated to lick its wounds and reconsider its strategies. But for Zaxner and his squad mates, the galactic political ramifications were far from their minds. They sat in the mess hall of their battlecruiser, the Forge of Unity, nursing wounds and swapping stories of their impossible victory. "Did you see the look on those swarm drones when Graxlor went into berserker mode?" chittered Kavax, a sylphid whose gossamer wings were currently regenerating after taking heavy damage in the fight. "I didn't even know mollusks could move that fast." Graxlor, his gelatinous form still quivering with residual adrenaline, or its mollusk equivalent, burbled happily. "It was the neural stimulators Commander Chen had the tech team rig up for me. Linked my pain receptors directly to my locomotive systems. The more damage I took, the faster and stronger I became." Zaxnor shook his head in amazement. "Incredible. And to think, just a few cycles ago, we could barely make it through a standard training course without collapsing." "Speak for yourself, bug boy," teased Lyra, a luminos whose bioluminescent patterns were still pulsing with the rhythms of battle. "Some of us were naturals from the start." The good-natured ribbing continued, each member of the squad recounting their most daring exploits from the battle. But beneath the bravado and jokes, there was a deep current of mutual respect and admiration. They had faced the impossible together and emerged victorious. As the conversation flowed, Zaxner found his gaze drawn to a quiet figure sitting at the end of the table. Zix, a void weaver, had been one of the most reluctant recruits when their training began. The ethereal energy-based lifeform had struggled to adapt to physical combat, its natural abilities more suited to manipulation of space-time than direct confrontation. But during the battle, Zix had been a revelation. Using techniques specially developed by Commander Chen and her team, the Void Weaver had bent the fabric of reality itself, creating localized time distortions that allowed their squad mates to move with impossible speed and precision. "Zix," Zaxner called out, his mandibles clicking in what the others now recognized as a smile. "You were amazing out there. I've never seen anything like what you did to that swarm battleship." The Void Weaver's form shimmered, a sign of emotional response in its species. I never thought I could be useful in combat." Zix's thoughts resonated directly in their minds. "My people have always been observers, not warriors. But Commander Chen, she showed me how to apply my natural abilities in ways I never imagined." A respectful hush fell over the group at the mention of their commander. Sarah Chen had become more than just a leader to them. She was a mentor, a friend, and in many ways, the heart of their unlikely family. "Speaking of the commander," rumbled Krog, a lithoid whose crystalline structure still bore the scars of their recent battle. "Has anyone seen her since we docked? She usually joins us for the post-mission debrief." As if summoned by the question, the mess hall doors slid open, and Commander Sarah Chen strode in. The entire room snapped to attention, a reflex born of months of grueling training and deepest respect. "At ease, you magnificent maniacs," Sarah said, a weary but proud smile on her face. "If anyone's earned the right to relax, it's you." As she made her way to their table, Zaxner couldn't help but marvel at the change in his human commander. Gone was the stern taskmaster who had pushed them beyond their limits in training. In her place stood a battle-worn veteran, her uniform still bearing the marks of combat, her eyes alight with a mixture of exhaustion and fierce pride. "Commander," Zaxner began, his voice thick with emotion, "we just wanted to say—" Sarah held up a hand, cutting him off. "Save it, Zax. I already know what you're going to say, and trust me, the feeling's mutual. What you all accomplished out there today." She paused, seeming to search for the right words. "Well, let's just say you've made this old human very, very proud." She pulled up a chair, groaning slightly as she sat down. Zaxnor noticed a fresh bandage on her arm, partially hidden by her sleeve. Even in the heat of battle, their commander had been right there with them, leading from the front. "But," Sarah continued, her tone growing serious, "we can't rest on our laurels. The swarm will be back and they'll have learned from this defeat. We need to stay one step ahead." A chorus of determined affirmations rang out around the table. There was no doubt, no hesitation in the faces or equivalent sensory organs of the assembled warriors. They were ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. "That's what I like to hear," Sarah said, her smile returning. "Now, who's going to fill me in on all the crazy stunts you pulled while I was busy keeping the fleet from falling apart?" As the squad launched into animated retellings of their most daring exploits, Zaxner felt a warmth in his thorax that had nothing to do with his species' biology. This diverse group of beings from across the galaxy, once struggling to work together, had become something greater than the sum of its parts. They were a family, forged in the crucible of what humans considered easy combat training. The universe, Zaxner realized, would never be the same, and neither would they. In the months that followed the Battle of Nexus Prime, the 1st Interspecies Rapid Response Battalion became the stuff of legend. Their exploits were celebrated in every corner of the galaxy, inspiring a new era of cooperation between species that had long viewed each other with suspicion or outright hostility. But for Commander Sarah Chen, the work was far from over. As she stood before the Galactic High Council, her dress uniform adorned with medals from a dozen different species, she felt the weight of expectation pressing down on her. "Commander Chen," intoned High Counselor Vexalia, her tentacles rippling with barely contained excitement, "your success has surpassed our wildest expectations. The first IRRB has single-handedly turned the tide of our war against the swarm. The Council is prepared to authorize the creation of 10 more such battalions immediately." Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she was about to say. "With all due respect, High Counselor, that would be a mistake." A ripple of shock passed through the assembled dignitaries. Vexalia's skin flushed a deep purple, a sign of confusion in her species. I don't understand, Commander. Surely more of these elite units would only strengthen our position." In theory, yes, Sarah replied, her voice steady, but the success of the first IRRB isn't something that can be mass-produced or rushed. What makes them special isn't just the training or the tactics, it's the bonds they've formed, the trust they've built. That takes time, and it takes the right mix of individuals. She paused, looking around the chamber at the representatives of 100 different species. Some she recognized from her own training days, others were entirely new to her. But in each face, she saw the same mixture of hope and uncertainty. What I'm proposing, Sarah continued, is something more ambitious. We need to take the lessons we've learned from the first IRRB and apply them on a galactic scale, not just in our military, but in every aspect of our society. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of voices, some excited, others skeptical. Sarah waited patiently for the noise to die down before continuing. Imagine a galaxy where every ship crew, every research team, every diplomatic mission is as diverse and cohesive as the first IRRB, where we don't just tolerate our differences but actively seek them out, knowing that our combined strengths are greater than any single species could achieve alone. As she spoke, Sarah could see the idea taking hold. The initial skepticism was giving way to excitement, to possibility. It won't be easy, she admitted. The training we put the first IRRB through was brutal, and scaling it up will be a monumental task. But if we succeed, we'll create a galactic society that's stronger, more resilient, and more innovative than anything we've ever seen. High Counselor Vexalia leaned forward, her eyes shining with a new light. What you're proposing, Commander Chen, is nothing short of a complete restructuring of galactic society. It's ambitious, perhaps even foolhardy, and yet... She paused, her gaze sweeping across the chamber. And yet I find myself intrigued. How do you propose we begin? Sarah allowed herself a small smile. This was the moment she'd been working towards for years, ever since she first conceived of the interspecies combat training program. We start, she said, her voice ringing with conviction, by opening our academies to every species in the galaxy. Not just for military training, but for every field of study. We create exchange programs, mixed species work teams, joint research initiatives. We take the principles that made the first IRRB successful and apply them to every aspect of galactic life. As Sarah laid out her vision, she could see the excitement building in the chamber. Representatives who had long been at odds were turning to each other, already beginning to discuss possibilities for collaboration. It won't be easy, Sarah repeated, her tone serious. We'll face resistance, setbacks, and moments where it all seems impossible. But if there's one thing I've learned from working with the first IRRB, it's that impossible is just another challenge to overcome. The chamber erupted in applause, a cacophony of sounds from 100 different species all united in a single purpose. As Sarah stepped back from the podium, she felt a hand on her shoulder. Turning, she found herself face to face with Zaxner, who had accompanied her as a representative of the first IRRB. You did it, Commander, Zaxner chittered softly, his compound eyes shimmering with what Sarah had come to recognize as tears of joy. You've given the galaxy a new purpose, a new hope. Sarah smiled, feeling the weight of the moment. We did it, Zax, all of us, and this is just the beginning. As they left the council chamber, already buzzing with plans and proposals, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on how far they'd come. From a ragtag group of aliens struggling through what humans considered easy combat training, to the vanguard of a new galactic order. The challenges ahead were enormous, but as she looked at Zaxnor, her student, her comrade, her friend, Sarah knew that they were ready to face whatever the universe might throw at them. Together they stepped out into a galaxy forever changed, ready to forge a future brighter than any single species could have imagined. The end, or perhaps just the beginning.